What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast, where we talk about all of the new streaming shows and movies that are horror adjacent or horror. I'd say that Godzilla's kind of like horror adjacent. But today we are talking about Monarch episode 6, and that's streaming on Apple TV. My buddy in the car. Hopefully, he's not going to get attacked by a three-headed deadite. I think there maybe there's a chainsaw nearby. Is Dr. Zayas God, Danny Torkel. Danny,
What's up?
we got Monarch number 6 to talk about. Are you back on board? How do you feel about this show?
Uh, I I think this might be my favorite episode of the season so far.
Okay.
Uh, the episode started, and almost immediately we got Wyatt Russell and we got the 1950s crew back, and I was like, yeah, they're back, okay. And
Right.
um, there wasn't a lot of monster in the episode, but there was some really great Godzilla moments in both timelines. Uh,
Yes.
and this was exactly what I was talking about last week, where the best episodes of like split timeline shows are the ones where you have each timeline and each one is doing something that like similar. And the 1950s group, they have like a device, like a Titan phone, as they call it, and they're trying to get proof of a Titan so that they can alert the military to get Monarch off the ground. And then in 2015, they find their father, who is basically doing the same thing, and we find out that he is trying to like wake Godzilla, and we get this like awesome like parallel of like Godzilla awakening in two different locations in two different timelines. I thought it was really awesome. I loved some of the scenes in this. I loved the character moments in this. Yeah, this got me right back on board. I got to be honest.
Yeah. Nice, man. Yeah. I do think that this episode was better. I'll say that this show, it hasn't like completely hooked me yet. I actually did like this episode a lot, but I'm not like super excited to watch this show. I was excited before we began watching it, and I liked the first episode a bit, but since then I haven't been like, oh yeah, it's time to watch Monarch, like some of the other shows that we've watched, right? Um, we talked about at the very first episode that Matt Fraction is one of the showrunners and he's a comic book writer. And the more I watch this show, the more it feels like what we call a tie-in issue to a comic. Like a lot of times when there's like a big event, like when they have like Civil War or the Infinity War. I mean, that was a long time ago, but like Secret Invasion, these big comic book events that take up multiple comic book issues, there's always like what we call tie-in books, and like a lot of times they'll be like explaining like a backstory, and that's what this whole show feels like. And tie-in books can be interesting, but they just are like never as exciting as like the main story, right? Which is kind of ironic because most of the MonsterVerse stuff has not been as exciting. You know, every time that we do this show, you always say to me, "Well, I watched Godzilla minus one, and that's this." And I finally got to see Godzilla minus one this week, and I just feel like, oh fuck, if there was like a Godzilla minus one part two, or if somehow this show referenced Godzilla minus one, I'd be like so excited to watch it, and yet it's not even the same continuity, you know?
Yeah. Well, the one thing is Godzilla minus one takes place like in immediate post-war Japan, and this show kind of picks up 10 years after that in the mid 50s. So maybe, but again, now we're like pulling hairs. Godzilla minus one is, and I think you even mentioned this after you saw it, it is going to rank fairly high in our list. Shocking to me. Like, I'm so excited that we are going to be doing our top 10 of 2023. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And a Godzilla movie is going to feature prominently in both of our lists, I'm assuming.
Hell
Uh,
yeah.
I also went out. I don't. Had you ever seen Shin Godzilla, which came out in like
No,
2016?
no.
So if you get a chance, I think I rented it on Amazon or I bought it on Amazon. It was only like $4, and it's awesome. Like it is also very Godzilla minus one esque. If you enjoyed Godzilla minus one, I think you'd like that as well. So the Toho Godzilla movies have been doing great. Like Godzilla minus one just won, I think, awards in Japan. The director is being talked about for like making big American debuts and potential franchises. I know he's hinted that he would love to do a Star Wars movie.
Oh
Uh,
my God.
and and all I could think of is sure, just bring Godzilla along. Who cares at this point? He could fight the Rancor. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I to bring it back to the show, like you said you don't particularly like get excited for these episodes. I feel like this episode for me was like a breaking point where if this episode was like episodes 4 and 5, where it was heavy on the human characters, heavy on the like I don't want to say unimportant flashbacks, but kind of side story flashbacks,
Yes, yes, yes.
then I might have been kind of willing to say, maybe we should just move on and do something else.
Right.
But this episode I think hooked me back in. It really I kind of got into this episode right from the beginning, and I liked what they were hinting at, and I was like, okay, now you just got to deliver. You got to deliver. And then I felt they delivered really big on the monster stuff at the end of this episode. It was well worth the wait for me, and it made me excited going into now the final like set. If there's 10 episodes, we're in the final 4. So like now you kind of got to push the story forward now. And I and they make there's this comment that Kurt Russell makes about how the dad is freeing Godzilla to help save everybody. And I guess it's like this idea that maybe because this show, as you said, is a filler. What was the tie-in?
Tie-in.
Yeah, that it maybe this is how you tie into King of the Monsters, because maybe the big thing that they are all predicting is like the coming of Ghidorah, which is obviously if this is set after Godzilla 2014, but before King of the Monsters, that would make sense that all the Titans are kind of coming together for that battle royal that you see in King of the Monsters, which I'm sure is going to lead me to rewatching that movie, which I have not done since I saw it in the movie theater.
Right.
But maybe given this framework, I will enjoy it more. And so yeah, I do. Yeah, I don't know. This episode for me, it did its job. It kind of rehooked me into the series. I was so glad they brought us back to the 1950s and Wyatt Russell and what's the name of the actress who plays Kiko Mora? Dr. Mora.
Mari Yamamoto.
Yeah, she's fantastic. She's beautiful and she's really good. And I like that, we kind of thought that they were gonna like hint at like a love triangle, and now they're like,
Full
I
on.
guess that they were like an item before, and then she makes it very clear that her goal is to see Monarch become something that it ends up not being. And we
Right.
find out why in this episode that Monarch becomes what it becomes, and that's because Wyatt Russell really fucks up and chooses to go after Dr. Mora, who he has a connection with, and he, you know, walks out on the general who basically tells him, look, I'm going to give you control of Monarch if you just play ball with me. But if you don't, I'm going to have to, you know, give it to somebody else. And of course, they give it to like the worst person, like the slimy secondary military character,
Right.
who, if he was a cartoon character, he'd like be like Snively Whiplash, it
Right,
feels like.
right. Awesome reference there. Yeah. No, one of the things that we talked about the last time we did this review is we said that it felt like we didn't really know what the show was totally about or like who it was for. Like it was sort of trying to get its footing, and we weren't sure like what they were trying to accomplish with it. And by this episode, it's very, very clear what the purpose of the show is, what the theme of the show is, right? It's basically like, what is the purpose of Monarch? And then how does this like love triangle from when it was conceived, like how does that affect the way that Monarch is run? Right. And with Keiko, it's really interesting. One of the things I think is an interesting choice is they show that like there's potentially infidelity there, right? Like at the very beginning, there's like because of this love triangle, there's like the potential for infidelity with Keiko and Lee, right? But then in the present day, so much of the story is based on infidelity and keeping a second life too, because we have Kate and we have Kentaro, who are both the children of Keiko's ancestor, right? So it's like there's always this like double life and like kind of cheat on a spouse, and it's kind of like been passed down in this family from the grandmother to at least Kate, who in the previous episode we saw that she kind of had a hard time being with just one person too.
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting stuff. And then yeah, obviously it's like Keiko really is the one that makes this show shine. If we're ever going to go back and talk about like what's good about this show, we're always going to say it's Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell together playing the same character, and then we're going to say it's Keiko, which you already mentioned how she's like beautiful and she's really there's like a spotlight on her whenever you watch a scene with her, and like with her, it's clear that like she has an affinity for Godzilla, or like Godzilla is special for her. And that in itself is really interesting because, like, in all the Japanese Godzilla movies that I've watched, there's always someone that is like a fan of Godzilla, and then there's a ton of people that are like, "Oh shit, it's Godzilla!" Which is funny because one of the things that's great about Godzilla minus one is that nobody fucking likes Godzilla. That Godzilla's really scary, and they're like, "Oh my god!" And as an audience, you're like, "Yeah, fuck Godzilla, yeah, kill him," But in this, it's more of Godzilla can be a hero, and she's like the advocate for Godzilla, and so that's what the whole show is really about. Is like, you think Godzilla's horrible, but you don't realize how he's like needed. And Godzilla King of the Monsters really shows that Godzilla could be the hero, and then Godzilla versus Kong is like Godzilla could be the hero
Well,
too.
that's really Godzilla's path, even in Japan. I mean, in the first ever Godzilla movie, he's just an animal who's the product of the nuclear bombs, and he stomps through Japan and destroys shit, and they have to come up with a way to stop him. And I think that it just evolved quickly over the course of a few movies where they were like, oh, Godzilla could just continue to stomp on Tokyo, or we can bring in other guys in suits and create these other cool monsters and turn this character into a good guy.
Right.
In many ways, Godzilla is very similar to the Terminator, where
Mm-hmm.
in 1984, the Terminator is the scariest character maybe in motion pictures at that point. Like, he's just a unstoppable killing machine, and every time you blow him up, he just comes back, and then he comes back as the friggin' metal endoskeleton. You're like, what the fuck? And then you blow that up, and then half of his body's crawling after you. And then in part two, they play on that so well with, like, Sarah Connor seeing him for the first time and flipping out and having to be told, oh no, he's the good guy now. Look, there's an even worse robot. And that basically became the template of the Terminator movies. And they basically did that with Godzilla. So I like how, we do know that there are, like, episode 1 of this series introduced the Mutos, which become actually which are the bad guys, the monsters that Godzilla has to fight in the original, in 2014's Godzilla, the Gareth Edwards film.
Right.
And so I like that they're, the other Titans that they introduce, you know, like we said, we know that there's that like battle royal scene at the end of King of the Monsters where Godzilla defeats Ghidorah and all the other monsters kind of acknowledge him as the alpha.
Right.
Yeah. And so I like that they're doing that. I like that they've set the stage for that, which leads me to think that, again, maybe I'm getting my hopes up, that they are setting up some kind of grand finale where Godzilla is going to fight some other Titan or a group of Titans.
Right.
We saw there was that Titan that destroyed the ship that had been like, they found the boat in the middle of the jungle that got
Mm-hmm.
destroyed by a Titan. We know
Mm-hmm.
that there's that Alaskan Titan that looks like a Cthulhu and freezes people.
Right.
So that we have met other monsters, and from what we're left to intuit, I think we're gonna get some type of like maybe mini monster brawl towards the end of this show. You know, King of the Monsters starts, and Mothra is already like, she's already basically captured and being used by Monarch in, like, isn't that where oh god, Conjuring,
Vera Farmiga.
yes, why can't I ever remember her name? Vera Farmiga's character, who is
Yeah.
maybe the most laughable villain in movie history.
Right.
Like she works for Monarch, and she has Mothra. Like, isn't there like the scene where like her daughter like visits Mothra and like sings
Yes.
to
Yes.
Mothra? So
Yes.
it's like
Yeah.
maybe we're gonna get Mothra soon, and maybe like we'll see how Mothra gets captured by Monarch. Maybe we're gonna see Rodan, because Rodan was in King of the Monsters as well. So who
Yes.
knows? I just, as a Godzilla fan and as somebody who liked parts of this series throughout the first 5 episodes, this episode made me very optimistic about the last group of episodes, and it to me it created a path that I want to go down.
Yeah. Don't you kind of think that with this next like episodes, we might actually either see Vera Farmiga or Charles Dance, like that they might kind of make a cameo at one point?
Um,
Because remember,
I
Charles Dance is in like the second one too. He's a
yeah,
bad
I
guy.
mean, I Charles Dance, a bad guy. Come on.
Yes, shocker.
Uh, he was a good guy in Alien 3. I remember being shocked when he got killed because I thought
Yeah,
they were like setting him up. Uh,
right, to be
but
the
yeah,
Hicks.
I listen. I would like it because like I said, I don't love King of the Monsters, so it would give me a reason
To
to
like
go
it
back and
more.
rewatch that, to go back and rewatch it and kind of reappraise it from a different angle. I mostly what I remember about that movie is everything being coated in like a shade of blue, and
Yeah.
then Ken Watanabe like somehow in the middle, like underwater in the middle of a cave, detonating an atomic bomb to wake Godzilla up,
Hell yeah.
which which I will say makes a lot more sense now, given that we now know that Godzilla can and does survive a nuclear bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big part of the ending of this episode, where Dr. Morrow was like, he's alive, like they didn't kill him, and then they have that moment of realization of, oh god, if an atomic bomb didn't kill him, then they're just going to keep building bigger bombs.
Right.
You know, and I do like the idea that it keeps coming back to, and even with the original movie, going back to 1954, I think it was, Godzilla is an animal. He's an ancient animal, but he's an animal. And the monsters are really the humans that have created a way for him to, do the things that he's doing.
Right.
We set off bombs in the ocean. We woke up an underwater dinosaur
Yeah.
from his, ancient slumber, and now we're like paying the price for it.
Yes.
And yeah, and I always kind of like that idea of humans being the monsters, and the monsters that we see, like, and that's also Frankenstein. That's also, hell, it's Cabin in the Woods for it's everything. You know, that's like one of the staples of horror.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't know. I mean, we always kind of go back to Godzilla minus one, but yeah, they always keep saying he's a prehistoric monster, or like a dinosaur. They kind of say like he's an ancient dinosaur, and when you see him in that, you know, at first he's like smaller and more rabid and stuff, and then he just is like gigantic. But it's never like he has his personality. He is like an animal, like you said, and it was cool to see him in this. It was cool to see his like spikes coming out of the desert ground, and then all of a sudden he comes out, and I was like, "Oh yeah, Godzilla's back!" And then he just kind of walks away. But it's all good. We got 4 more episodes of this show to go, and then coming up now, Danny and I are actually going to record another video where we talk about the sacrifice game. So as we come to a close, you know, we're in the middle of December. We're going to have a little bit of horror, holiday horror. We're going to keep talking about Monarch. And then, of course, we're going to eventually get to our best of 2023. So make sure you guys stick around and keep watching the Lasser cast. And Danny and I'll see you guys next week.